Hello and welcome to this Gluware demonstration. Today we're going to be looking at automating APIs, both in the southbound perspective, where Gluware is going to be automating Cisco Meraki, and in the northbound perspective, where Gluware is going to be automating ServiceNow via integration. So let's get signed into Gluware and get started. So here we are signed into Gluware, and what we're going to do is navigate into the device manager. So new in Gluware Release 5, we've introduced a technology called API modeling. So this has been developed in Gluware over many years, but with a recent breakthrough, we've enabled API modeling to very quickly onboard API-based endpoints for controllers and the network layer. So in this example, we're automating Cisco Meraki, and we're going to dive into what that means. So with API modeling, you actually get the whole app suite of functionality from Gluware. And we're going to start off here with Device Manager. So one of the things that you're going to see, and as let's say, reorder this right here, we're going to see a new entity here called the Meraki Cloud Service. And if I just double click on that device quickly here, let's jump into the configuration. And just know that Gluware is talking to the Meraki Cloud. It's api.meraki.com via an API key. So instead of talking southbound to network devices with SSH directly, in this paradigm of this particular type of controller, and most controllers function this way, you talk to the controller via API. Then via API, we execute many GET statements to collect what we perform when Gluware performs a device discovery. So in the case of Meraki, device discovery is a little bit unique because you have constructs like organizations and networks and devices. So it's a little hierarchical in that nature. But using those API calls, we're able to collect all the information about the underlying system. So very quickly here, I'll navigate over to the Meraki system I'm going to be automating just to show you that, it is a real Meraki system, although it's really for test purposes. So it's not really large in terms of number of devices here. If we even navigate back all the way out to the Meraki top level, you can see that, it's just a normal running Meraki environment. And this is what we're going to be automating via API. So normally within Meraki, if you were going to configure something like orgs, you would be navigate in to settings and then, navigating through a menu that looks like this. And while this is user-friendly, it gets challenging when you're having to do this over hundreds of networks or thousands of devices. So really it's kind of a scalability challenge when you're managing this type of thing through a web-based interface like you see here. So let's jump back into the Gluware environment and just see that we've run discovery on this Meraki. So we've connected to it and we've extracted all the information about the devices, as well as we've captured the Meraki orgs and the Meraki networks they belong to. So once they're in the Gluware system, you have the ability to do things like filter this view by your Meraki org. There I can see the majority are in this particular org, and I have 2 in my prod org. We can also do things like filter by network. Might be a little more interesting in that there's 7 devices in lab, 2 in this home network, and 2 in the Americas. Again, it's a smaller example, but you can see that by pulling all of this data into here, you could see across your entire Meraki inventory very quickly and easily. So let's go ahead and clear that filter. One other thing I want to show you that's really quite powerful is if I double click into any device, I see that the details on the top, but I can navigate into the configuration view, this one right here, and you're going to see the entire configuration of that device. Now, this actual view is not possible in the Meraki web view, and it's actually dozens and dozens of API calls to pull and get this data. And in fact, when we pull that data, I'll click the JSON button, that data is actually coming across in these JSON structures. So what we're able to do for you here is essentially recreate the entire config file as one viewable file in a JSON view like this, which if I scroll to the bottom here, you're at over 2,100 lines of configuration with the JSON code structures in there. And then we've converted it to a more user-friendly view in what's called dot notation. So in the dot notation view, we're still over 1,100 lines of config, but here I can look across my network settings, my org level settings, my, all of this here. So you have your group settings. So you have all of that here that has been captured from the system, so it can function as a backup. So moving on, in the application suite, we've looked at Device Manager here. Let's move into Drift and Audit. So as we navigate into Config, Drift, and Audit, we see a view here, and at this point, all of these configurations are in sync, meaning drift has not occurred. So we're going to make a change and cause drift, but we want to just show you that in this initial comparison, and if I double click in, again, I can see a comparison from different snapshots, and I can even go back potentially to older snapshots that did have drift and look at what that drift looks like here. So, when things do change, I could see, oh, someone came in and changed something. So that's what drift is, where you can do snapshots from a previously determined good state or good snapshot to a subsequent snapshot and see exactly what changed. That's config drift. And let's finally navigate into config audit. We'll navigate into an audit policy. And just to keep things kind of simple, I built a one rule audit that is looking at the SNMP v2 and v3 settings at the org level. So you remember I talked to you about the dot notation. If I just navigate back here and I view the configuration file, I can take this entire config and break it up into rules, which is essentially what I've done with the org. If you look at your org SNMP rules, here's the current configuration, and all you have to do is copy and paste that right into a rule. And if there are things that are changing, you can use wildcards, but you can very quickly and easily build a no-code audit to audit your configuration. Again, very, very useful for compliance purposes, but also so many users are in that Meraki UI, and it's easy to make errors as you're navigating all those forms. And so an audit can help to highlight that. So with that being highlighted of my drift and audit, what we're going to do is back up a little bit to my device view. We're going to through the Meraki organization, we're going to do something. We're going to make a change that is, let's say, not a good change. If someone did it in production, they would potentially disable monitoring of devices, and it could be very negative. So let's emulate an unwanted change. So I'm going to change to SNMP v3 being disabled, and I'm going to save the change. Okay, so Meraki, that change has happened at the controller level, and that change gets pushed out to all of the devices, or the orgs in this case. And ultimately the org config is part of the device config. So when I navigate to Gluware, back to Gluware now, I can select my devices. Really, we're talking directly through the controller, but out of habit, you select all the devices, and you say, update my snapshot. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll come back when the snapshot has completed. Start capture. Okay, the snapshot has completed, which means we've reinterrogated that Meraki cloud service and have issued dozens of API calls to collect the data, and we see that we have change detected. And if I scroll over here, I can see that if I look across the Meraki networks, these are affecting the Americas and the Office Lab. The home network was isolated, so that one was not affected by this change. So if I double click into any one of these, like this switch, and I look at the compare view here, I can click in and see that the SNMP change is what flagged the condition here. So we're seeing that the SNMP view is false and it is supposed to be true. So that is ultimately what triggered this, and I'm just showcasing that is identifying that correctly. So now let's switch over to the audit view, and we're going to run our audit. So let me close out of this and just show you that we're going to run the Meraki SNMP audit. So if I highlight the devices that I want to run in this particular organization or network, which is going to be the Office Lab, I'll select these devices and execute an audit. And I'm going to select the audit to be an SNMP audit and start the audit. So this is generally scheduled and run on a regular cadence, like potentially every day, and I can see that there were audit violations. So let's view the results. And I can see across these devices that there were violations across all of these devices. So if I click into the violations here, I can see that the SNMP v3 was supposed to be true, and it's missing. So we can identify that is a violation, and so what we're going to do is re-provision this or remediate this and fix that in the next step with config modeling. So let's move on over into config modeling. And I'm going to close some views out here just for navigating this, and that if I browse config modeling from a node perspective, I see all my devices here. But the purpose of config modeling is to model configurations that are assigned to these devices. So as I double click into my Meraki node, my Meraki Cloud Service Endpoint, I can see the constructs that I've built here that I'm going to be automating. So let me double click out of this panel, and I'll just show you that for this Meraki Cloud, I am automating an assembly of equipment, of functions and services. And I have a synchronizer, which is a really important construct with Gluware related to APIs, and that when there are changes made on the API side, Gluware synchronizes all the required APIs. And when there are changes made on the end user device side, Gluware can pull in all those changes. So essentially we're keeping a copy of that API data, the data models, in our system, and then using it for automation. So just moving on forward here, again, I'll click into this, and that we're automating the Office Lab. That's the network I'm focused on. And we're automating SNMP settings, but I wanted to showcase that on the global side, we're automating the same settings you saw in the UI. Gluware presents a form similar, and we can surface the configuration you're using and hide any of the configuration from a Meraki standpoint you're not using for simplicity. So in this case, we're enabling SNMP v3, and we see all of the various configuration along with it. So all we have to do once we have the configuration modeled with the so-called intended state, we provision. And so let's navigate to the cloud instance and execute a start action of a provision the feature. So we'll go ahead and proceed. And the power here is that Gluware, in the same way we are with CLI, on the API side, we're declarative. So we're going to read the current state, compare it to the desired state, and make the changes necessary. And you can dive into the configuration log and see exactly what's happening. So you can see all of the API action in terms of that we're pulling this information and looking at the SNMP data that we're automating, and then as it gets into the next steps that it's executing through all of the configuration that Gluware is managing, and that it's automating. So if I just back out to the summary view here, I can see that the provisioning is finished and complete. So from a quick view standpoint, let's navigate over to the Meraki side and just hit a refresh on this view here. And if I scroll down, I can see the SNMP3 is enabled and everything is restored. So now that it's restored, I want to run an audit again and make sure the network is restored, right, from an audit standpoint. So what we're going to do is something more interesting. Instead of showing it to you back in the audit, we're going to look at it in Network RPA for process automation. So now let's navigate into Network RPA for process automation. So here in Gluware Network RPA, the goal is to build no-code process automation that's easily repeatable and accessible to network operations. So before we jump into a fairly complex Meraki audit with remediation, I want to introduce you to the Gluware Service Connectors, and Gluware Service Connectors are new in Gluware Release 5. And I want to show you an example of one here. So let's navigate into View the Workflow. And here we're in a read-only view of this particular workflow, but we're going to do something very simple into just, I'm executing a filter for devices, and I'm using an integration with ServiceNow that's, again, built by Gluware, native API integration, that is creating an incident. So what you're going to see in the next demonstration is a more complex integration with ServiceNow, but from a Gluware Service Connector standpoint, you have a package of tasks available to you to just drag and drop in API integrations, in this case with ServiceNow. So here I have my open my incident, where I'm opening up the incident and I'm inserting in Gluware test, and I'm creating variables. I'm creating a variable here called snow for ServiceNow, and it's an object variable, meaning I'm going to capture the whole JSON object, and I'm going to capture the whole task response. And so that'll come into play in a minute here. But I just want to show you a very simple example of an integration and with ServiceNow, how we can literally just drag and drop in and open up an incident. So if I go to workflow activity, this one's already been run. I want to show you the log because I think this is where it's fairly interesting, in that Gluware will show you the entire JSON object that came as a result of that call. So here's the entire JSON object. It's actually quite large, you can see here, and then we can refer to values in this by dot notation. So I can say snow.number will give me this, snow.system ID will give me this, and we can see some of that in the subsequent example. So just a quick introduction to Gluware Service Connectors and how they're able to let you integrate API-based systems programmatically, really more on the management side or the service side versus the network layer. So let's dive back into the workflow library and take a look at a fairly complex but exciting example automating Meraki. So let's go ahead and go also into the workflow view here to see how this workflow is built. And again, I'm navigating back into a workflow that's been built in a read-only mode, so I have that warning. I could definitely edit this workflow, but since it's already built, we're going to do a little show and tell. From a process standpoint, again, you have a set of your tasks and your task library that you're able to drag and drop over here. I'm executing a filter for all of my operating system equals Meraki in my inventory. So that's the first filter. Next, I'm capturing the configs. This is what you saw in Device Manager, is it executing dozens and dozens of API calls to collect all the configuration data. Next, I have a third-party integration here, which comes from a library that we've integrated with StackStorm, where we are updating a Slack channel. So we're just posting it into a Slack channel just to notify the user from, when you have automation running, it's good to kind of keep the humans in the loop. So on this channel n-RPA for network RPA, we're going to be just texting in Gluware is running an audit of the Meraki devices. So we have that happening. Then we're actually running the audit. This task is calling that underlying policy you've already seen here with the Meraki SNMP audit. Now we have a conditional. So if the violation count equals 0, we continue on the good path. If so-called the else, or if it does not equal, if it's greater than or equal, if it's not equal to 0, it will travel this path where we're going to send, in both cases we send emails. One, we're saying, hey, everything is good. These devices had no violations. In this path, we're going to say this workflow was run and we did have devices that failed. And then the next step is we're going to do that ServiceNow integration. We're going to open the incident. So we're going to open up an incident and say audit violations were found. We update Slack again, just saying that there have been audit violations and we're going to remediate. Then we're taking a step to remediate. So while provisioning, we're going to re-provision good configuration from config modeling. And then we'll move on to the final step of capturing the new configuration, updating Slack, running a second audit to validate that it's been resolved. Again, the emails for notification. If we run a remediation and we fail an audit again, we're going to want to update that ticket to say that, so this is a second ServiceNow integration, and we're going to see even after provisioning there were still audit failures. So now it does need human attention, right? And then we send a Slack saying the workflow is complete. So that's a kind of a quick flyby of the Gluware workflow. And this can be, set up and run as a bot, right, where it's an automated activity that's either scheduled or triggered or obviously run manually. So let's go back to the workflow activity view. Let's go back to the workflow library view, and we're going to take this and we're going to run this. So we're going to actions run and execute, and we're going to go to the activity view while it's running. So while a workflow is running, you can click into the log view, which is your high-level log of things that are happening at that level. We can click out of that. And then up in the upper right here, you can navigate between overall info of the workflow, target level, which is highlighting all the Meraki devices that are being interacted with in this example, and then your task level. And the task level is kind of the most important in terms of as it steps through those workflows here. You're watching each task as it steps through and completes. And so this task is going to take a few minutes, so we'll come back when it's complete. Okay, so the capture configuration task has executed successfully. Now moving on, we've hit the Slack chat message. So let's navigate over into chat. And I can see my last message here is that Gluware is running an audit of the Meraki devices. I also hit this next message, which is Gluware found audit violations and is remediating. So we know that's taking place. So we've run the audit, we've sent the email notifications, we've created an incident in Slack as well. So let's go ahead in ServiceNow, sorry. So let's go ahead and navigate into ServiceNow and refresh this view here. You can see the last one I had run here was Gluware test. That was what I showed you previously. Now Gluware, I can see that the Gluware was found audit violations, so this pulled up. Basically, I can see that the ServiceNow incident was opened as expected. Now we've configured to remediate, and it's running through the subsequent path here, the capture post-audit config. It'll run through the post-audit, the audit, the configuration, and finish the workflow. Okay, I can see my second configuration capture post-audit executed, and that it then sent the subsequent Slack message. It ran the second audit to verify, and it sent the email and the final Slack message. So let's go into the Slack feed and see that Gluware executed saying audit of the Meraki devices has completed. And we can take a look at the email as well. So 1 second, I will pull that up. So here in the email, I can see the original 6 devices that failed the audit, and I can see that 3 of those were remediated, but it looks like there were still some that possibly did not get fully remediated. So this is where an automated workflow will do a lot of work for you, but sometimes there's human intervention required when potentially something does not, complete in the way you would expect. So jumping back to that, we have, completed that workflow. And if we want to iterate, we can jump back to the workflow library. We can take a look at this particular test, and we can jump back into edit mode, and we can edit this workflow as needed. So potentially what I have to take a look at is my audit policies, and if there's any particular rules that maybe need wildcards or something to take care of variables that are possibly changing during provisioning. Sometimes that's related to like secrets and keys and things like that. So with that, this concludes the demonstration of Gluware automating Meraki through API modeling that you saw in the application suite, as well as the process automation side you see here in Network RPA that also includes integration with ServiceNow via the Gluware Service Connectors and third-party supported packages like StackStorm for the Slack integration. This concludes this demo. Thank you.